But I do want to keep us on time, and it is really my deep pleasure to be able to introduce you to Katy Butler, who is an amazing friend and colleague. He was a journalist and then got activated in end-of-life and palliative care with the care that her father received that created a lot of challenges for her and her mother. And that was the topic of her first book, Knocking on Heaven's Door. And as she started to get really immersed in this whole movement, she started to see these opportunities, this information, this wisdom within the palliative care community that could be brought out to a greater audience for help people with everyday living. And this is my copy of The Art of Dying Well. And Katy will be available later. We'll be selling the books and be available right after this and later in the day for signing them. I think this is just an amazing book that is very beautifully and artfully written. And when I look at it, I think this is the book that my mom, who's 97, has been waiting to have. So I encourage you, I'm really excited about Katy's presentation. And just want to turn it over to Katy, and I'm so excited to have her here. Please join me in welcoming Katy Butler.
Great. So thank you, Judy. And thank you to all of you for inviting me here. I think these conferences are so important, and they're not just important for your CEUs. They're important for building community, and I know that a lot of you in your institutions have an uphill struggle with the work that you're doing, and it's so important for you and for me to get to connect with you so that we can really support each other and find some joy in what we're doing here. I'm going to begin just by telling you a little bit about how I got here. I'm going to tell you some stories that come out of the research that I did for my book. I'm going to offer you a few alternative languages, including visual languages that might help you. And if they don't, please let me know. You may have much better ideas. And then hopefully we'll have a little Q&A as well. Great. So why am I here? I'm here because I want to reduce the unnecessary suffering that's occurring at the hands of the medical system for people as they approach the end of life. I think this is the elephant in the room of almost every palliative care or hospice conference. The unnecessary suffering. We all know we're going to experience unavoidable suffering in our lives, but it's the unavoidable suffering that I think we want to start moving the needle on. When I was in my early 40s, I took a leave from my job at the San Francisco Chronicle, and I went and lived in Plum Village in southern France. This is a Buddhist community started by the Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. And every morning we used to recite, "I'm of the nature to grow old. There's nothing I can do to prevent growing old. I am of the nature to get sick. There's nothing I can do to prevent getting sick. I'm of the nature to die. There's nothing I can do to prevent my death. And everything and everyone that I love is of the nature to change. There's nothing I can do to prevent being separated from them." So I was in my early 40s, and this just went straight over my head. None of my siblings died in childhood. My parents were enjoying very healthy retirements and older age. It was almost like modern medicine had given us a path from this eternal truths. And then, when I was in my early 50s, My dad, who was then 79, came up from his basement study, put on a kettle for tea, and had a devastating stroke. And at this point, our family life turned absolutely upside down. My mother, as you can see, became an absolutely exhausted caregiver. I started flying back and forth across the country, trying to help them out in various crises. And my dad started saying things like, I don't know who I am anymore. I'm not going to get better. It would have been better for your mother if I died of the stroke. And eventually he started to say, I'm living too long. So this went on for 6.5 years as he descended into dementia, multiple strokes, blindness, misery. And my mother and I came to feel that our suffering had been made much, much worse by the fact that he had been given a pacemaker 2 years into this journey. And my mother got more information. She was the decision maker by then. She got more information when she bought a new Camry automobile a year later than when this decision was made. And I think what's even more important is that my father was reduced from a full human being with an emotional life, a family life, even a spiritual life. He was reduced to a blip on an electrocardiogram. He was reduced to a diagnosis. And all of these dimensions of our family life were left out of the picture and left out of the conversation. So as Judy said, I then wrote a book called Knocking on Heaven's Door that really unpacks what happened to our family. He actually ended up dying a nice death, as nice as a death can be, under hospice and palliative care, by the way. But that was at the very end of a bad journey. So I wrote one book. People got it, really responded to it. And I started to get emails and even phone calls at my home from people who were facing their own version of these dilemmas. It could be a feeding tube or a swallow test or an ICU stay or a late life Hail Mary surgery. The panoply of questions was great, but the overall template was pretty much the same. The sense of being lost in a fog, not knowing how to make a decision, feeling a conflict between your gut sense of what you need for the people you love and the language that you're being offered and the procedures that you're being offered. And so I realized I really needed to write a book that was more about solutions for people who are trying to navigate these very broken and fragmented medical systems and do their best. And that there were possibilities for not controlling our lives or our deaths or our declines, but shaping them. In the years that I've spent listening to hundreds of people's stories of good and difficult declines and deaths, I've learned one thing. People who are willing to contemplate their aging, vulnerability, and mortality often live better lives in old age and illness and experience better deaths than those who don't. They keep shaping lives of comfort, joy, and meaning, even as their bodies decline. They get clear-eyed about the trajectory of their illnesses so they can plan. They regard their doctors as their consultants, not their bosses. They seek out medical allies who help them thrive, even in the face of disappointment and adversity. And they prepare for a good death. They enroll in hospice earlier, and they often feel and function better, and sometimes even live longer than those who insist on maximum treatment. They make peace with the coming of death, and they seize the time to forgive, to apologize, and to thank those they love. They rethink the meaning of the word hope, and they often die with less physical suffering and just as much attention to the sacred as our ancestors did. Here is a compass and the beginnings of a map. So that is the encouraging vision that I wanted to put out, because it's not enough to say to people, you don't want to die plugged into machines, do you? Or take me out and shoot me if I get like that. People need a positive vision of the ways that they can shape their own destinies, and they need a language of empowerment to go along with that. So I interviewed so many people about good deaths, bad deaths, good declines, thriving despite physical limitation, and I've distilled this down. I sort of looked at medicine the way an anthropologist would look at a foreign subculture. And this is what I came up with. I'm going to begin with a diagnosis. There's a period of life that I'm calling the gray zone. It's in between active living and active dying. And for the 1900s, the gray zone tended to be relatively short. Medicine was very ineffective. People took weeks or months to die, but very seldom much longer than that. But now the gray zone, thanks in part to all of our advances, has expanded from months to years to even decades for some people. And this is not only old age. This is also for people who are managing, for example, a stage 4 cancer, but managing it relatively well, sometimes for 10 or even 20 years. So the gray zone has problems and issues of its own, and we don't have language or a landscape, a sense of the landscape. You know, we see those ARP stories about 80-year-old marathon runners, but there's another elephant in the room here. So this is my diagnosis. We in the lay community have delegated the management of death to medicine, and with the exception of all of you in this room, medicine does a better job of warding off death than preparing people for peaceful ones. We lose our voices, and this loss of voice happens on both sides of the table. We stop being able to communicate with you about what matters to us, but you also, not necessarily you in the room, but a lot of oncologists and nephrologists and all of those ologists, a lot of them get tongue-tied about presenting some sense of the landscape ahead. And we end up feeling like we got to play 20 questions, you know? Is it bigger than a bread box? What do you mean by a response rate? You know, how many people respond? We shouldn't have to be playing that kind of game. We should get a much clearer picture much earlier. And then, at the very point in the gray zone, when we need coordinated medical care, we're being forced to hop from silo to silo. And this is not only organ by organ, ologist by ologist, this is also in time, longitudinally. We're supposed to have one set of experts for curative, another set of experts for the gray zone, and then move to an entirely different set of providers when we're approaching and preparing for a good death. And when I say a good death, some people I know object to the concept of a good death. I really mean a well-supported death. We have a great deal of influence over whether people are well-supported, whether they're not in pain, whether they're surrounded by people they love or people that they feel care for them. So I'm fine with the concept of a good death. We cry to be seen as emotional, relational, even spiritual beings, and we're reduced to a bundle of diagnosis. We don't understand the hidden rules and the secret argot of medicine. We don't understand that the protocol in most places will be treat, treat, treat until someone in the family says no. We don't know this. You know it. And so there are all these strange kind of nod, nod, wink, wink, nudge, nudge kind of conversations where, well, I hear all your options. You know, I really hope you take option B, but I don't feel comfortable even telling you why I think option B is a good idea. All right. And we have no map. So what happens to us as a result of this loss of language? We stop being able to talk to you about what we're really worried about in the gray zone. I was really floored by this Kaiser Foundation study from 2017 about what concerns people most. It was a survey. What worries you most about the end of life? What matters most to you? The number one concern was being a financial burden on the family. And I think that's actually, if you really unpack that would also be about being an emotional and practical burden on the family. But this is not something that people usually bring into the consulting room. Having loved ones around you. being at peace spiritually. What's that last one? I can't read it. Pain-free, pain-free. So, and then the number one concern for only 23 people is living as long as possible. But somehow these conversations get reshaped so that these other concerns are like not even mentioned, right? So we need a common language, we need a map of the territory. And as patients, we need to know, where are we on this map? Where are we in this journey? So what if the gray zone wasn't actually gray? What if it actually was a very colorful and fertile stage of life, where there's an opportunity for comfort, meaning, and joy at each stage of decline, at each turning point? So in my book, I've created chapters, and each chapter represents another stage on this journey between active living and active dying. So I start with resilience. This is the stage I'm in now at the age of 70. So this is the age you can still reverse a lot of health conditions with, usually with some form of group support, like whatever, AA, a diabetes support group, whatever. You can actually reverse some conditions, and you still have the resilience to go through a hip surgery. Then there's the stage I call slowing down. People often hear they've got these multiple ologists. Polypharmacy is a huge problem. If people can simplify their healthcare and their lives at this point, they do a lot better. Adapting to disability, this means go for a whole new spectrum. Things like occupational therapy, physical therapy, all of these things. And now I'm going to get to the more intense part of the spectrum. House of Cards. How many of you know Daniel Hofer from Sharp Medical Systems? He's the one that introduced me to this term, the House of Cards. This is the stage, it could be, you could call it advanced frailty, where people tend to come back worse if they go into the hospital, not better. So an older person is dehydrated, gets dizzy, falls, is actually kind of fine, but ends up in the ER for hours, and then 3 days in the hospital, and then 3 weeks in a nursing facility, and comes out worse rather than better. And I'm going to read you a little story from the book about that. Sometimes a family advocate must become a warrior. That was the case for Karen Randall when she cared for her father, Ed Walsky, a widower in his early 80s who'd spent his working life at IBM. He had dementia and Parkinson's disease. And he was also in very fragmented fee-for-service medicine and could not qualify for hospice, by the way. In the last year of his life, staff at his assisted living complex sent him to the hospital 9 times, sometimes because he'd fallen, other times because he was agitated or screaming, maybe untreated pain. The first few times, his daughter rushed to the hospital and did what she assumed was the loving, caring thing. She insisted doctors pull out all the stops, run every possible test, and as she put it, find out what was causing his bizarre changes of behavior and fix it. I really needed answers, she said. I wanted my dad back. So natural. But the tests were usually inconclusive, and after 3 days in the hospital and 3 weeks in the nursing home, he would go home in worse shape. I'd say, okay, we got him through this, and now he's going to get rehab and be back where he was, Karen said. But he never came back. It was a stair-step down to the basement. The result of this was that she only could get him on hospice care 3 days before he actually died. And she was forced at one point, within 24 hours, to say no to a swallow test 3 times, even though her father had a post and said very clearly, no feeding tubes. She knew this was the precursor to a feeding tube. But over and over again, she was asked, do you understand? He might get another pneumonia. He might die. There's something wrong here. Okay. So people need a map at this stage very badly. because this is not an unusual story. Then there's awareness of mortality. And again, we could call this facing mortality, probably more active. This could occur, I mean, ideally, I was exposed to it when I was in my early 40s. Ideally, we would live in a way that was aware of the reality of dying, even as we were enjoying and living the fullest possible lives. So this is unfortunately where palliative care often comes in, when it would be so much better if it came in 2 or 3 pie slices earlier. So Amy Berman, let me see if I can find her. Here she is. Amy Berman is a nurse. She actually works for the John Hartford Foundation. And when she was in her early 50s, she discovered a roughened patch on her breast. It turned out to be inflammatory breast cancer. She lined herself up with the nation's leading expert in her cancer, which is a very aggressive form, and was going to see him in Philadelphia. But the night before her meeting, she got a call from her regular cancer doctor telling her that a biopsy had shown that the cancer had already spread to her spine. And she knew, because she's a nurse, that this meant it was stage 4, that it could be managed, but it could not be cured. The next morning, Amy told the famous oncologist about her biopsy results. He didn't pause. "This is what we're going to do," he said. "This is what we're going to do." Plowing ahead with his plan, 6 weeks of intense chemotherapy, followed by surgery to remove her breast, then radiation and another round of chemo. This aggressive Hail Mary treatment plan would expose her to great suffering, and then she'd bump along, for who knew how long, in severely damaged health. And for what? Her cancer could not be rooted out. She questioned the unspoken assumption that the most harrowing treatment would produce the best possible result. There was no conversation, she said. He was an expert in everything except what really mattered to me. I thanked him for his time, and I left. I want to really encourage people to understand that they can fire their doctor. They can find someone who's better aligned with their own values and easier to talk to and to understand. Back in Brooklyn, her original oncologist asked a more welcome question. What do you want to accomplish? I love that. What do you want to accomplish? It's so simple. The language is so simple. We don't need to talk about scans and results, and that's the real question. Amy said she hoped for a Niagara Falls trajectory, to live as well as possible for as long as possible, and then plunge over the waterfall to death without undue delay. The aim was not cure. It was to slow her cancer down while interfering as little as possible with her life. It's now been 9 years since Amy stood weeping with her mother in the rain, getting those bad biopsy results. She knows her days are numbered, and she accepts it. She remains on the top side of Niagara Falls. She's taken an estrogen suppressant, but she's never spent an afternoon in a recliner while a toxic chemo dripped into her veins. She's never been hospitalized or needed a home health aide. Her hair hasn't fallen out. She hasn't gone into debt. She has climbed the Great Wall of China, ridden a jet ski to the base of the Statue of Liberty, and seen her daughter Stephanie graduate from college and get married. She has made quality of her life her priority, and paradoxically, she's outlived many people who opt for more grueling treatments. Most doctors, she said, focus only on length of life. That's not my only metric. So the purpose of these stories is really to encourage people to stay in charge, to ask their difficult questions, and ask themselves repeatedly, what are you trying to accomplish? I think quality of life is a term that people intuitively understand. It's one of the few terms used a lot in medicine that people kind of get. They don't have to ask questions in order to understand it. And then we have preparing for a good death. I hope you are getting that the whole point of this book is to keep people thinking of themselves as full human beings. Relational, familial, emotional, spiritual, and not only as a diagnosis and how do I handle this diagnosis. Do not underestimate the power of your emotional legacy. That's another term I love, emotional legacy. Again, this is something people understand intuitively. Kathy Doobie was raised on the East Coast by a violent alcoholic mother. She had no memory of ever hearing her mother say, "I love you." Kathy eventually moved to California, but the two women's relationship continued to be marked by bitterness, distrust, and estrangement. When Kathy was in her 40s, her mother developed breast cancer. A little more than a week before her death, she was admitted to the hospital. Over the phone, she said to her daughter, "Don't come. I don't want to see you." Kathy got on a plane anyway, on the advice of a friend who said that if she didn't, she would regret it for the rest of her life. Kathy walked into her mother's hospital room. There she found a tiny figure curled up in bed, shrunken, yellow, bald, bronzed by jaundice, as she later described it in a poem. This was the mother she had feared for so long. The two women looked at each other in silence. Kathy's mother said aloud, for the first time that Kathy could remember, "I love you, I'm sorry." That was it. Kathy replied, "I love you, and I'm sorry." Those few moments, Kathy said, cleared up a lifetime of misunderstanding each other. Now, I want to offer you a few tools that I hope might provide some language that would be helpful to you in your own work. And none of this is like, evidence-based medicine. This is a reporter and a language person talking to you about the language that other people have talked to me about that's worked for them. I'm encouraging people to get a trajectory of their illnesses. A doctor at Kaiser recommended this to me. He said people often can understand a sketch when they really can't understand a barrage of words. It gives you a sense of an ending. You have a sense of where things are heading. So here's the Niagara Falls trajectory. This is quite common, very healthy younger person with a cancer that's treated once, for example. It's also true for end-stage renal failure without dialysis. So there's sort of a quality of life axis down the side, how you feel, how you're functioning, and then a time. The other axis is time. And here's kidney failure with dialysis. A constant change in quality of life every 3 days, right? I'd love to see, I just challenge you, start creating your own little napkin charts. See how they go over with people. Here's looping decline, organ failure of various kinds, crisis, in the hospital, get a little bit better, get stabilized, come back, but never quite at the same level as before. This is so important because medicine's been so successful for us. We assume it's going to be the way it was in our 30s or 40s or 50s. You have a terrible illness or something, you get a surgery, you get treated, and you go right back up to where you were before anything happened. That's our mental picture. So if we don't have some of these alternatives, we're kind of at sea. There's the dwindles. This is dementia, multiple tiny ailments, things that just wind down slowly. And then the stair step down. I was actually shown this by an Alzheimer's Association counselor when my mother and I were really exploring where are things heading with my dad. I can't really explain to you why this was reassuring and helpful to me, but it really was. It was like, oh, things are going to get worse, and they're going to get worse in this progression. We can't predict exactly how long this is going to take, but the how long question isn't really as important as the quality of life question or the how. And what kind of caregiving are we going to need? What kind of caregiving are we going to need to plan for? Okay? And I want to share some language that is very difficult for lay people. When you're in a medical crisis, you can't absorb a single new word. And I think even phrases like goals of care, even prognosis is really too much for a lot of people. Prognosis, diagnosis, thrombosis. Within medicine, you know, prognosis really is code for bad news, right? Does she understand her prognosis, right? Maybe a forecast. Maybe this is what the course of this illness usually looks like. It really is like a forecast. It's very close to a weather forecast in the sense that weather forecasts are quite accurate within a day or two, and they're quite accurate in the very long term, like 10 years from now. But the middle, there's a lot of, it doesn't show up quite the way it's expected. And I think it's actually very true for prognosis as well. Progressive. I mean, isn't progress a good thing? You know? Isn't progressive politics a great thing? It takes work to translate, especially in a crisis, to be translating that rather than hearing, this is a disease that tends to get worse over time. No? I think it's almost like medical people, and I know a lot of you are not in this category, but it's almost like they want the bomb to drop, but not until they've left your room. You know, like just enough sugarcoating, just enough euphemism, just enough bafflement, so you don't have to see that person in that sadness or in that shock in the moment. Maybe they'll figure it out an hour or two from now. It's a protective mechanism, and of course the language of medical training makes this very difficult. I have a friend named Sunita Puri who's just written a really beautiful book called That Good Night about her work as a palliative care doctor, and she says she almost had to unlearn all of the language of spirituality that she grew up with in order to become a doctor. And then when she became a palliative care doctor, she had to reclaim that language of the heart, that language of the spirit, in order to communicate clearly with her patients. Multiple organ systems failure, this is my favorite. How about dying? How about approaching the end of life? How about your mother's systems are shutting down? These are things people can understand. Multiple comorbidities, that's another one. Yeah. Comfort care, this is another thing people intuitively understand, at least I do. It's not enough to tell people about a bad future that you hope they avoid. It's so important to give them a positive image of where they're heading. I think there's a language of abandonment. If you ask someone to withdraw care, you are always going to get a no, because that's the language of, you're telling me to abandon my mother. To a lay person, the word care is a very different word than it is for people within medicine, because within medicine it usually means not just care, but also treatments and interventions. But for a lay person, care is compassion, caring about something, being careful. You just never want to use the word care when you're really talking about withdrawal treatment or release someone from technology. And there's a language of commitment. I will do my best to keep you pain-free all the way to the end. I will help you live meaningfully in the time you have left. Again, these images of positive futures are so important. So how am I doing time-wise? Pretty well. Okay, so here's a palliative care conversation from the point of view of a family. This is a lucky, lucky family. Their mother had a major brain bleed in her 50s, and she needed care from her 50s on. But when she was in her 70s, she got into the PACE program. How many of you know about the PACE program? It's a fantastic government program that I think should be available to everybody in the gray zone. But it's a lot of medical care at home. It's all coordinated, daycare, the whole 9 yards, all in one package. So she was in the PACE program, so she got fabulous care. And then when she was 84, she developed a couple of pneumonias and ended up in the hospital. Didn't get better, started getting worse. They offered her thoracentesis to pull out fluid in between her lungs and her rib cage. They turned it down, family turned it down, and so at this point, and she stopped eating and drinking. So at this point, they have a palliative care conference by her bedside. A social worker convened a big family meeting around Louise's bed. Her husband, Jean, sat in a plastic chair at its foot with his head in his hands. Her daughter, Lee, sat on one side of the bed, and the daughter, Anne, at the other. Standing up, now this is another very interesting thing, the family's sitting down, and all the medical people are standing up. There's a power difference, right? Standing up were a young doctor in training, his physician supervisor from the hospital's palliative care team, 2 social workers and a nurse. So the family's outnumbered. They were there to discuss what doctors call goals of care. Her daughter Lee doesn't remember the words the young doctor used when he made his first fumbling attempt. His supervising doctor stepped in and gave it another try. But nothing they said registered with Jean, who just sat there with his head in his hands. They were talking medical, Lee remembers. They were talking medical. I just love that. They were saying things like, "We are concerned about her care and we want to keep her comfortable." They just danced around it. They were more uncomfortable than we were. They were saying we could move her into a nursing home and giving a whole laundry list of options as if she was going to live another 5 months. Finally, I got exasperated. I grabbed Dad's hands and said, "Let me see if I can summarize what these nice people are too kind to say out loud is that we're discussing what kind of death to give Mom." Everyone exhaled. The elephant in the room was acknowledged, Lee said, and everyone was free to be more specific. With tears running down his face, Louise's husband looked up. "What's the point?" he said. "She always wanted to go before I did. Let's give her that. Let's do it now. Let's take her off antibiotics." And the wonderful thing, because she was in this coordinated medical system, was that she could then be moved to a fantastic inpatient palliative care unit, palliative care and hospice unit, where she died essentially a very beautiful death over 4 or 5 days. And when I talked to Lee, her daughter, about it, she kept talking about the beautiful mission oak tables in this hospice unit, and the wood paneling, and the fact that the room was like a beautiful hotel room, not like any kind of medical clinical function. And that the 2 daughters could actually sleep on little cots in their mother's room, and they could wheel her bed over to the window and look out at the valley as she was going through her dying process. Again, everything in the environment said, you're not just a patient. You're not just a diagnosis. You are a full human being, and you can die with your family, and you can die in beauty. We need, obviously, such huge changes in our overall medical system to make deaths like this more possible, more easy for people to just segue into. The problems in the way we've structured reimbursement, the perverse incentives that affect all the institutions that you work in. We're all working with broken systems, whether we're patients or families or people, providers in all of these different places. And I imagine it's extremely stressful for many of you, that many of you suffer moral distress as a result of things that you see or watch or wish you could influence and find that you cannot. I think one of the healing possibilities are rites of passage. Anytime you can participate or improvise or help a family improvise a rite of passage, I think you might feel better yourself as well. This is a forester in the suburbs of Seattle who is dying of MS. And thanks to a chaplain at his nursing home, volunteer firefighters gurneyed him out into the woods so he could have a last glimpse and smell of his beloved trees. He died a few weeks after this. This is the bone marrow transplant unit at UCSF. The man on the left is the father of the bride. She's getting married in the ICU. I met her at the Endwell conference, and she's now started a foundation to help other people have a better, have these good emotional legacies. And she said she felt the nurses on the unit got into it almost more than she did. I mean, it's left her with a very positive memory, and as I'm sure you all know, a bone marrow transplant type of death is not an easy, it's a harrowing death. But she's been left with a sense of empowerment and really excellent memories, and I bet you the moral distress of the nurses on that unit has also decreased. So when I talk to audiences that are non-medical, I always let people know about these candles, these fake candles that really look like real candles and really can produce a sense of the sacred in the room. I really encourage people to get telemetry turned off, TVs turned off, ask for a private room, even if you don't get it, ask. There's some stories in the book about quite beautiful deaths on ICU units, and that was a big surprise to me when I was writing the book, because I just thought, you know, whatever you do, don't die in ICU. But there are ways that people who work in those units and family members have really taken charge and seized the space and made things much more ceremonial, better memories than they would have been otherwise. And so finally, there are some nurses at Cottage Hospital in Santa Barbara. I imagine they might have presented at this conference at some point. But there was a change in the protocol of the hospital so that after a death, bodies were being zipped up into body bags and gurneyed out the back elevator without the sense of intimacy and feeling and sacredness that had been before. And these nurses, because they're oncology nurses, had really gotten to know these patients over a long time. And so this was very distressing for them. They ended up creating a bathing and honoring practice that I would like to share with you. And what I love about it is not just the practice itself, but the permission that it gives you to create your own, improvise your own rites of passage, whether it's for your own family members or whether it's for people who are your patients. After washing and dressing the dead in clothes from home or a clean gown, the nurses encourage relatives and friends to anoint the body with lavender oil. The physicality seems to be very helpful, said Beth Combs. I have a theory that after witnessing a death, we go into shock, and our minds become numb and chaotic. When we start bathing and touching our loved ones, our bodies understand what our minds cannot. Here is an adapted version of their ceremony for your use. As the hair is anointed with oil, a nurse or a family member recites, "We honor Jane's hair that the wind has played with." Next, a dab of oil is gently rubbed on the brow as someone says, "We honor John's brow, the birthplace of his thoughts." In each succeeding sentence, the name of the dead person is inserted at the appropriate place. We honor your eyes that have looked on us with love and viewed the beauty of the earth. We honor your nostrils, the gateway of breath. We honor your ears that listened for our voices. We honor your lips that have spoken truth. We honor your shoulders that have borne burdens and strength. We honor your heart that has loved us. We honor your arms that have embraced us. We honor your hands that have held our hands and done so many things in this life. We honor your legs that have carried you into new places of challenge. We honor your feet that walked your own path through life. We give thanks to the gifts you have given us in our lifetime. We give thanks for the memories we created together. We have been honored to be part of your life. And what I think is so beautiful about this is that out of their moral distress, out of their emotional pain from the way they saw things being handled, they came up with the help of people from Metta Institute and other places, they came up with this beautiful non-denominational ceremony that would be available to anyone of any religious tradition or none. And that out of their pain, they then, one of them joined a group that I started on Facebook that you're all very welcome to join called Slow Medicine, which is a very cross-cultural, cross-fertilizing group of people inside and outside medicine. And one of them was in this group and posted a reference to the piece that they had written for Oncology Nursing Forum about this ceremony they had created. And I got to hear about it, and then I got to put it in this book, and now I get it to share it with you, and I get to share it with all the lay people who will read this book, who aren't in this world that you're in, and it gives all of us this opportunity for healing from the distress that we suffer, and also for helping others, and being empowered, and going ahead and seizing the moment, rising to the occasion, taking a risk, improvising something. I hope this will give you some permission to do whatever it is that you think would be just that little bit helpful within that system that you're working within. And I'm really honored to get to share what I've learned with you and to learn from you a lot of what I know I still don't know. So thank you very much. Yeah. So I want to suggest that we have a conversation, some conversation. We've got mics, we've got 2 sets of mics. I would love to hear both questions that you have, comments. Actually, let's just start with talking to each other for how are we doing time-wise? I'm afraid my clock's all right. Okay, good. Let's just do 5 minutes, ideally with someone you did not come with, and even if that means you have to get up and sit at a different place on your table to do that. Have you learned anything from what I've said? Is there anything that you can use? Do you have problems with it? Do you have better language? How are you approaching some of these issues? We'll just do 5 minutes each way, and I'll gong the gong, and then I'll gong it again in 5 minutes. We're good. Plenty of time?
We have plenty of time.
Yeah. It's
It's going to give you 10 minutes to do the
yes.
Q&A in like 2 minutes. So
Yeah.
we're 10 minutes ahead of schedule.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. Actually, could you leave the screen on? I have a final slide. I need a slide. I have one final slide that I'd love to have up there. Yeah.
The video, something just happened.
Oh. And if it doesn't get fixed, it doesn't matter. Yeah, it's not
Literally,
like.
as I walked up
Yeah.
to that mic, the
Yeah.
projector,
Just-
take a breaker.
Yeah, it's not super serious, so it doesn't matter. Yeah. Yeah.
You want me to turn your mic completely off right now, or just kind of leave it down? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, wow, it's a lot. Uh, 10, 10 and 5. Yeah, 10, yeah, 10, 5. Do the, yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Perfect. All right. All right. Wonderful. Just what we need. This is fabulous. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Thank you. This is great. I mean, it couldn't be better. It really. It's better than anything we say this way. I really think so. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Thank you to all. Thank you. No wonder no one was listening to me. Yeah. So this is wonderful. I think this is just a beautiful way to start the conference for people to be so open to talking with each other. And I think this is where the healing, this is where the community comes from. This is where feeding your soul for the difficult work you're going to go back to for the next year. So I'm really pleased. And please come up to these mics, and if you have questions, if you have discussion, if you have comments, other places we could take this, I'd love to hear from you, and I'm sure you want to hear from each other. Don't all jump up at once, huh? Come up to a mic, huh? This one should, yeah, either one. You can just line up at the mics, yeah. And let us know who you are, where you work, what you do.
Grace Cordovano. I'm a board-certified patient advocate working in the oncology space. I loved every word of your talk, and I thought that the images and showing what the forecast would be is so powerful to help patients and their loved ones understand. But I really loved the comment about acknowledging the grief that frontline caregivers face. We know that families grieve, but there's also frontline caregivers, so where do they put that grief? And there's so much talk about moral injury and burnout. That's such a beautiful thing to share, so I'd love to see more of that.
Thank you. Do you have any suggestions for where people can go? Or do other people have suggestions?
I'm sharing this on Twitter. I just think that at like the patient experience conferences, this is something that should be more routine at our hospitals and care facilities.
And is anyone out there, are you in systems where you feel there is a place for you to take your moral distress or your moral injury? I'd love to hear about that. There's a wonderful young woman, what's her name? She's Japanese, and does anyone see her talk about, she's very big on trying to decrease all the beepers, and Yoko Sen is working in a hospital in Baltimore, and one of the things they created was kind of a healing meditation room in the hospital for the frontline caregivers, so that there's a place for them to go and at least relax, a humane space. Yeah. Great. I'm surprised. I thought more of you would want to come up and, yeah.
Hi. Have you heard of CISM, the Critical Incident Stress Management Training? Our hospital, I'm at Los Robles Hospital in Thousand Oaks, and we had a group of about 20 of us that went through that training specifically to be able to start what we call a CAPS team, Care and Peer Support Team. So whenever a nurse, a unit has a big incident, it started when we had a mother who had delivered, had a stroke during labor. Yeah. So it affected the NICU, it affected the labor and delivery, it affected the critical care unit, and mom ended up being taken off life support and was a donor, but it affected the whole team. So we started this so that they can call and ask for, we do debriefings and also what's the word I'm looking for? Immediate counseling within 24 hours.
Yeah.
And as you know, we are the hospital that had the borderline incident and the fires, and we had one of the nurses also in a terrible car accident within those weeks. So we had our ER group, which, by the way, the ER group was the only group that never called the CAPS team because they had that we can take care of our own
Yeah.
type of attitude. You're familiar. But they then now access, because it was their ER nurse that was in the car accident. So we did some debriefing sessions with them, and it's been,
Great.
it doesn't help always,
Yeah.
but it's there and it can make a big difference.
Yeah, and I really am a big fan of this rites of passage. You know, that rites of passage acknowledge the seriousness and depth of something that's happened. They put them in a context of this is a universal of human life, and that there's also a way to bring some beauty to these environments and these memories. There's a wonderful Jewish ritual called the Yahrzeit candle. I'm actually not Jewish, but I have adopted it. You can buy, it's a 24-hour candle that you buy at Safeway in the kosher food section, and it burns for literally 24 hours. And for several years after my parents' death, I would set up a little altar at home on the anniversary of their deaths or their wedding anniversary, flowers, photographs, and this 24-hour candle. And to bring beautiful memories in memories that had been in some ways quite horrifying was very healing for me. So, yeah.
Larry Wildemuth, I've served at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center for 22 years as chaplain, but here representing Code Alliance and Go Wish cards.
Okay.
But at Valley Medical, we've been involved with critical incident debriefing for many, many years, but just this last year, we instituted Code Lavender, where any staff member can get a half an hour of reprieve from any kind of stress. We have set rooms that have been painted lavender.
Wow.
We have reclining chairs. We have incense, and a spiritual care can be there. They can talk or not talk, but it has the support of the administration. I think that's the important
Great.
thing of getting that and getting it instituted.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, Katy. Katy, I have a request. I love your book, read it all. I'm Jill McCarthy with Hines Hospice in Fresno, California. Would you read the Advanced Care Directive Addendum for dementia that you have in your book for this group,
Sure.
please?
If I can find it fast. Let's see. I wrote my father suffered from dementia, and I saw what it does to a family. So I ended up writing, I think it's in my House of Cards chapter, a letter to supplement my advance directive and make it very clear to my family members and to my designated proxy what I wanted and did not want close to the end of life, okay? And not close to the end of life, in dementia, okay. And this also ran on the Conversation Project blog page. If you want to access it easily, you could probably access it most easily from there, unless you buy the book, which of course will give you all kinds of even more stuff. But dear medical advocate, if you're reading this because I can't make my own medical decisions due to dementia, please understand that I don't want to prolong my living or dying, even if I seem relatively happy or content. The purpose of this letter was to remove all guilt and all second guessing from whoever makes these decisions for me. Because people get into that and then think, she seems happy, you know. So, as a human being who currently has the moral and intellectual capacity to make my own decisions, I want you to know that I care about the emotional, financial, and practical burdens that dementia places on those who love me. Once I am demented, I may become oblivious to such concerns. So please let my wishes, as stated below, guide you. I wish to remove all barriers to a natural, peaceful, and timely death. Please ask my medical team to provide comfort care only. Try to qualify me for hospice. I do not wish any attempt at resuscitation. Ask my doctor to sign a do not resuscitate order and order me a do not resuscitate bracelet from the Medic Alert Foundation. Ask my medical team to allow natural death. Do not authorize any medical procedure that might prolong or delay my death. Do not transport me to a hospital. I prefer to die in the place that has become my home. Do not intubate me or give me intravenous fluids. I do not want treatments that may prolong or increase my suffering. Do not treat my infections with antibiotics. Give me painkillers instead. Ask my doctor to deactivate all medical devices, such as defibrillators, that might delay death and cause pain. Ask my doctor to deactivate any medical device that might delay death, even those, such as pacemakers, that might improve my comfort. See, I want to be very clear. If I'm eating, let me eat what I want, and don't put me on thickened liquids. Even this... There's a doctor named Eric Widera, and he put out a challenge that anybody who prescribes thickened liquids ought to have to eat, thickened liquids for a week and see. Even if this increases my risk of pneumonia. Do not force or coax me to eat. Do not authorize a feeding tube for me, even on a trial basis. If one is inserted, please ask for its immediate removal. Ask to stop and do not give permission to start dialysis. The idea of demented people being gurneyed to these dialysis units when they're at a point in their lives they cannot even understand the reason they're being put through suffering, to me is just a moral outrage, and very profitable. Do not agree to any tests whose result would be meaningless, given my desire to avoid treatments that might be burdensome, agitating, painful, or prolonging of my life or death. Do not give me a flu or other vaccine that might delay my death unless required to protect others. Do keep me out of physical pain with opioids if necessary. Ask my doctor to fill out the medical orders known as POLST or MOLST to confirm the wishes that I have expressed here. If I must be institutionalized, please do your best to find a place with art workshops and access to nature if I can still enjoy them. So what I like about this is why can't advance directives sound like that? What's the problem? These advance directives, they're intimidating to people. This legalistic language, they're not followed half the time anyway, so why are they so legalistic, I think it's much better to have your family members clear, really clear, and not subject to feelings of guilt than it is to create some kind of, etched in stone, boilerplate thing that just intimidates people. And in the book, I really encourage people, don't just sign all these check boxes. Go to a coffee shop, sit down with the people who are going to make your decisions. Really have a free, floating kitchen table discussion about all this. It's so important for us as lay people to feel empowered again, to feel that we can shape our experience even if we can't control it. Great. More questions? Surely. What's wrong? Why are more people not coming up to the mic? I'm really curious. What?
It's the beginning.
It's so early? Yeah. Too early in the morning? Yeah.
Hi, my name's Tess Lorraine, and I started getting into this work many, many years ago when my father owned nursing homes, but I do death cafes, and I also have designed an extensive training on getting people to prepare for end of life.
Yeah.
And I think one of the most touching things that you said was that we don't really have models that take into consideration kind of our humanity, our spirituality, our emotional well-being. And I don't think we have those even in our life. We don't know how to do relationship. We don't have infrastructures of support around relationship.
Yeah.
And so when it comes time to our own death and dying, we're in a field that we haven't even been oriented to most of our life. So it really needs to start now in the conversations we have and being willing to be more naked in who we are. And I think grief has to do with that as well.
Yeah.
Because we all grieve. And we're all dealing with loss. And we don't take time to hold that for one another. So it makes it harder when we come into those big choices.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's why when I started the book, I started with resilience and slowing down. I didn't just start at House of Cards, because people do have an opportunity, while they still have resilience and some energy, to do more to build community in the neighborhood. Things like the villages. People know about the villages, which is this nationwide, neighborhood by neighborhood mutual support program for people who are trying to age in place. That, we need to start like knowing our neighbors' phone numbers or picking up a prescription for them long before it's it's a crisis. And I think the deaf cafes are a wonderful movement. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Margie Mayfield. I'm director of Coastal Kids Home Care. We're a home health and palliative care program for 4 counties in the Central Coast. I started going to homes. I'm on call 24/7, and so when our kids are passing in the middle of the night, I go usually with one of our social workers. And I just started doing bathing, and I wanted to comment on your ceremony that you were telling us about. Thank you. I started bathing and offering to bathe children when they died with their parents or their mothers, because I didn't quite know what else to do. And what it's become is this beautiful ritual where I have the most intense moments with family members, and we don't have something very formal that we do, but we end up talking about things like we comb their hair and we talk about how handsome he was, or we put their favorite creams on and we talk about how they love to smell good for the ladies. And I mean, it's amazing, and we even have laughs while we do this. And recently I've had more and more family members join me, and I just think it is something really, really beautiful.
Beautiful. Thank you. And it's a tradition across cultures, almost all cultures. Ritually bathing the bodies of the dead, either volunteers from the spiritual community or family members. It's amazing. It's in Muslim communities, it's in Judaism, it's in Christianity, or it was in all of these traditions. So. And Buddhism, yeah. I don't know.
No.
Okay. It's on now. Okay. Improvise.
Well, I'm Stan Turman. I'm a psychiatrist, caring advocate, giving a presentation tomorrow with 3 colleagues. I love your simple language in your advance directive. I think we can do better, and we must try to have physicians and others better than 50% compliance. And I think I totally agree with not coaxing and forcing, feeding, one step further, and that is not to offer, but not to put the spoon in the patient's mouth if that's what the patient has written in her or his advance directive. Which is,
So if you were going to add a sentence to mine, what would you add?
place
do
the
not-
food,
Yeah.
place the food and fluid in front of me, but if I don't feed myself, it's because my mind has been so deteriorated in terms of its cognitive functioning due to my brain disease. Just allow me to die of my underlying disease.
Yeah, so a sentence that could just say simply, feel free to put food in front of me, but please do not put a spoon in my mouth.
Exactly.
Let's keep it simple.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Michael?
I just wanted
This is the last one. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you to comment on your view of. I just wanted to ask you to comment on your view of the role of this sort of emerging end-of-life doula movement.
Yeah. End-of-life doulas. I have to just confess, I don't know enough. I left it out of the book because it's such a nascent movement at this point, and I think things are going to evolve, but again, you people in this room, I think we're going to have an end-of-life doula breakout session. So other people who are much more informed than me are going to cover that. So thank you very much. I really have enjoyed this immensely.